All right. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Andrew Wurster. I'm a photographer, designer, publisher, kind of all-around creator. I've made photographs, as I was just saying before, almost every day for about 20 years. Kind of came from a trip to Europe. Initially, they came from being or as a basis for painting. So I previously painted for many years, sort of landscape painting, and then I kind of came back from that trip and realized that my photographs were more interesting than my paintings. So I used the camera that I'd been given by our neighbor in high school, and I've moved on to my sixth or so camera now, seventh camera, and I've also expanded my practice to include portraits. I've shot some politicians and events and all sorts of bits and pieces. And I also studied graphic design, so I do some publishing design. I have a little exercise I call Photobooks now, so I've produced about 4 books in the last 3 years with a whole bunch more ready to come out. I'm still sort of exploring things. I feel like there might be some more creative stuff I come back to or discover in the future as well, like a lot of us.
So there's a lot there actually, but let's go to the painting.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that about you. We've already had a bit of a chat before we started this.
Yeah.
Okay. So you started with painting.
Well, I went to Montessori kindergarten in Melbourne, so there's a very creative kind of start to my life. My dad was quite creative. My great uncle was a quite well-known architect in the States. I've just always made things, and yeah, like from even Lego, I see as a real creative thing as well. And then my favorite place in high school was always the art class. By the time I was finishing high school, I think I had 4 hours of art a day because I'd done everything else I needed to do. And I explored pretty much everything. My parents actually paid for me to have an internship with a local artist in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I went to high school, who we recently reconnected after 25 years, like this past week or two. And we did a lot of life drawing, still life, Chinese calligraphy, as well as gouache and oil painting and all sorts of stuff. She was incredible. And then I went to university and studied graphic design and art history, continued on with the life drawing. And then I kind of dropped out of uni actually, and then moved out to Melbourne when I was 20 and a half. And really jumped into painting for many years. Had a few exhibitions here and there, sold a few bits and pieces. Then the thing that's really grabbed me since that time in 2003 has been photography. I've taken those photographs almost daily for almost exactly 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so I have somewhere there's a big archive, but I have for many years I wasn't super smart with my archive. So there's lots of stuff I've lost, but it is what it is. I print quite a bit now, and I'm much smarter about data backup than I used to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's a job in itself.
Yeah,
Data backup.
right. It's just like I spend a couple hours a week just making sure my Dropbox is organized and looking for stuff. And I have a friend who has this little gallery in Clunes called the Service Street Pane. And I posted something on Instagram yesterday, and he was like, "That's what we're going to put in the gallery." I'm like, "Cool," but I knew about when I made it, but it took me probably an extra 20 minutes to find the high res because I'm organized, but not quite that organized. And I got there.
You found it.
Yeah, I found it.
That's what matters.
It was before I got really strict about stuff. It's probably a 6-year-old image or something, so it's good to find, you know.
So you sold a couple of paintings, you said?
Sold a few paintings, yeah, not tons.
So I guess why stop and go to photography? I mean, you said you liked your photos earlier. You said you liked
it was always like the photos were always a bit of a basis for the paintings. One of the people I really enjoyed spending time with when I was in high school was this great photographer called Chuck Heine, who's in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He actually took my senior high school photograph. We're still kind of loosely in touch these days. And so he was always just a really relaxed, smart sort of guy. And so that was, he was a bit of an influence. I've been a big music fan, so I've always spent a lot of time looking at images of music, be it, Bowie or jazz or all sorts of stuff. I love lots of different kinds of music. And there's something about, particularly when I was in Europe with that camera and the prints that I got out of those, particularly in Berlin. I got these incredible prints out of that, these black and white prints. And I was like, forget it. I put 2 of them on a wall if you remember the Myers Place bar that used to be in the city in Myers Place. And I sold them.
I vaguely.
It was one of the first laneway bars in Melbourne. And I sold both of those prints the first night I put them up. I was just like, wow, okay, that's interesting. That was a really good result from the first go, And every time I put something out there, people buy things, and sold a pretty good number of prints now over the years. And it's a different process. It's a more social process. Having come to making pictures of people over the last 7 or 8 years, I enjoy that side of it as well. And it's an interesting kind of combination of stuff.
Yeah. So you just stopped at that point.
Painting. I haven't picked up a paintbrush in 20 years.
You haven't drawn anything?
Oh, I do draw. Okay. I've been doing, as I said, the last few years, I've kind of come back to doing some graphic design, and I've actually really enjoyed drawing through that. But I didn't pick up a pencil to draw for decades.
Okay. And so you started your photographic journey.
Yeah.
At that point, what were you photographing mostly?
It's very my photos have always been very much based on place. Obviously, that trip to Europe was about sort of soaking in the architecture and the ambience and the light. And so a lot of it, I think I came to my photography from I called it. It was almost abstract. Like I would look at buildings and try and obviously make it a photograph, but make it slightly abstracted, focusing on details. And things have evolved a great deal since that point, but that's kind of was my entry point. And it's expanded into people, and it's very much focused on place over time. As I kind of mentioned in that previous discussion, like my long-term projects like High Street and the Ballarat one and a few others where High Street in Thornbury and Northcote and what have you 10 years ago were very different to what they are now, and I can't even imagine what they were like 30, 40 years ago.
Is there a particular reason you chose High Street? Because you could find that in almost
that's very true. It was a bit random. So I actually got divorced. My ex-wife moved to the very top of High Street in Preston, and I kind of moved to not far from the bottom in Fairfield. So I would drop my daughter off, and then sometimes walk down High Street or tram or drive or whatever it was. And I was taking a lot of photos, and so it sort of became a thing where it just gradually evolved into this process, and it became an entire way of working, a way of methodology, and a way that I produce things.
So how long ago was this that you
10
started
years.
this? 10 years.
Yeah, almost to the month. It was I think it was July to be exact. Took a few months of messing around to go, oh, this is a thing.
Did you start off with that in mind of
No,
making a series?
no. It was around the time that Lightroom had launched. So I was, exploring cataloging and putting things together and comparisons and, just making folders of stuff. And I came back to a folder that said, Northcote. I was like, oh, well, that's the same street and that's the same street. And then over the course of maybe 2 or 3, 4 months after that, I was like, all right, maybe this is turning into something else beyond that. And it's still going, which is kind of exciting.
Do you see an end? High Street has an end. Do you
it
see
does.
Do you see an end to the series?
Look, I am kind of planning to produce a book for myself and to, in theory, to sell as well. But I'm beginning to dig through a lot of the images recently, and actually ran into somebody from the Darebin Council recently, and there may be some kind of cool news that happens with that specific project in the next few months. It just depends on where it goes, you know. I like the process, and that place continues to change from top to bottom, north to south. It's always a little bit different.
Has it changed that much? I'm just trying to.
Well, there's always seems to be one shop going and a new shop coming. There's always a new construction site with something going a little bit higher again. If you look at the state government planning stuff, it is kind of designated as an activity area, as the saying. So that whole strip is able to be higher than a lot of the rest of it around, I believe. And it's a long, diverse street, and I really like it more than almost any other street in the city.
I actually can't even remember what the top of High Street looks like.
Well, you kind of get up to Reservoir, and it's
near the train station.
It peters off. And I can't remember. I'd have to look at the map. So I know I have it in notes somewhere, but it just sort of stops because there's the reservoirs, and then it just sort of peters out. And it might go another kilometer past that, but not a great deal. So it's interesting, you know.
And were you painting this sort of stuff as well?
To an extent, yeah. Paintings were very much, they were expressions of those photographs.
Okay. And now you went. You mentioned the last 7 years or so you've been taking a lot more portraits.
Yeah, I happened upon a set of, like on Facebook Marketplace or something, I happened upon a pretty cheap set of lights, which we both have, as we found out recently. And I was like, well, let's buy them. They were $200 or $300 or something. So I bought them, and I just kind of went on from there. And I don't take as many as I like. I really want to do more. Recently, I shot some stuff for a local theatre company. I've shot a government minister or two. I mean, sometimes just friends. But it's an interesting way of making pictures and learning about lighting and all. That's just a different discipline, as we all know. And it's just, you know, another arrow in your quiver, or however you want to say it. It's a fun way of doing things. But people are interesting, and interacting with people is interesting as well, you know. Yeah,
and so I guess how do you approach photography? So you don't have you didn't study photography.
I studied graphic design and I've studied art history. So I probably come at it from a lot of different angles.
So is there an inspiration there from?
I mean, I think a lot of people who would have a similar style of mine. I mean, the new typographics movement is pretty integral, being that they were one of the first sort of sets of people to kind of get away from. It's documentary photography, and I've actually, having finished my website recently, I don't know if I'm an artist. I create things, I record things. I sort of feel more like a documentarian or a documentary maker more than anything else. It's an interesting thing. I mean, there's people like Man Ray. Like there's so many aspects to photography, and any person that picks up a camera will bring their own experience to it, and it's an interesting thing.
I actually haven't seen any of your work, but I'm gonna have a guess here. And you know, there's kind of really meticulous photographers, and then there's photographers that are just kind of fast and loose. I'm guessing you're like the more meticulous end of the spectrum.
I have a very distinct style. I work, there's a lot of stuff I just don't shoot. And the longer I do it, the less I shoot, and the happier I am with the images. I suppose I understand the way the technology works. I understand what I want. I know what fits inside of what I'm doing. I think I'd like to think my photos are fairly distinctive. Be it the editing or the cropping or all the different things. It's my eye. It works. And I feel like, it is what it is. My dad was in advertising. One of his business partners was one of the chief designers at Saatchi & Saatchi in London. So he knew Charles Saatchi. And he came and stayed at my house when I was 10, 11 or something. And he's like, you'll be a photographer one day. And that was always in the back of my mind. And I always quite liked it. My my dad had cameras, and I was, I got my first camera when I was 14 or something, which I still have. It's an interesting art form because it's a kind of a combination of different things. I got tired of sitting in my studio all the time painting.
Yeah, well,
Like,
photography lets you get out
yeah,
into the world.
It's quite social in a different kind of way.
And so who are you in just photographers? Who are you inspired by?
There's so many different, but the first person that I saw that really kind of grabbed me, I was like, I want to make pictures like that, was Jeff Browse.
Don't know that name.
So yeah, a lot of people say that. He's very much in that kind of new topographic kind of vein, but he still is active today. There's an incredible book I bought at readings in Carlton. I still have it. I look at it on a regular basis, called Approaching Nowhere. And it's kind of edgelands, so that sort of space in between urban and rural stuff. There's quite a bit of industrial things. He was also Midwest based, so like that strikes a chord in me sort of from being a teenager. He did a lot of different stuff, but that book was really the beginning of it for me, and I bought it around the time I was beginning to identify what my photos were and the direction I kind of wanted to take with them. But there's so many people that are influential. I still discover people almost on a weekly basis. I've never heard of this person before. And I've got a library of books, and I work very close to readings in Carlton, so I spend a lot of time in there. I don't spend any money there anymore because I can't afford it. But there's so many people out there, and that's before you get to, the 21st century existence of Instagram and all the rest of it.
So what makes another photographer's work jump out at you?
Yeah, that's a good question. The number of people that have sent me stuff for Photobooks now books, I'm like, there's just something rings true. I guess probably the best way of looking at it. It's like when you hear a song. I'm obsessed with music, and there's some stuff that just doesn't do it for me. Which is very similar to stuff that I love, but it's very much I think it does relate back to the things I like making when I'm curating things. Somebody said to me recently, he was like, "Man, your photos are great, but they're just sad," which is good. I mean, I do like a lot of the times I'm looking at what was there. It's kind of like a reflection on how things have changed. And like particularly with the stuff like the High Street Project and whatever else it might be, there's a bit of disuse, there's a bit of brokenness about them, there's a bit of.
When your friend said that was sad,
he's actually an architect.
Okay, was he referring to your work on the High Street work?
Not so much that, but I think that probably would have fit into that.
Okay, I'm just wondering because you mentioned divorce and things like that. Do you think that reflects what you're feeling?
I don't know
on
that
inside?
there's. I'm always interested to see what people think my personality might be like, because they've a lot of people have seen, whoever has looked at my photographs over the 20 years ish that they've kind of been in the public realm. I think maybe sadness isn't quite the right word, but a lot of the buildings I photograph are quite deliberately forlorn. They're a little bit kind of unloved, a little bit, worse for the wear. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. I mean, as I said to you before, like the number of times I've driven past this place and gone, I love that. And then finding out that little connection that we had, that was cool. But like that's where I go with my photos. I've done that I've spent time in Tokyo in Japan, and I've searched out weird neighborhoods that are a long way away from where people, definitely tourists, would go, and just meandering and making pictures of. And the number of times people have asked me, "What are you making pictures of that for?" Particularly in Melbourne, it's fascinating, because. It's not about. I mean, as I said, I don't really see it as art. I see it as a process of documentary. If that answers the question.
You're taking photos of that precisely for the people who are asking why you take
Yes,
a photo.
pretty much. Like, I mean, when you look at somebody like Mark Strizic, who worked in Melbourne for many years and only passed away quite recently, he was what, a Hungarian? He came just after the war, maybe during the war, and photographed a lot of the city, particularly as Wheel and the Wrecker was kind of coming through and knocking stuff down. And it's really interesting to see. We've gone through this incredible expansion over the years that I've lived here, and kind of documenting that in all sorts of ways is really interesting.
Yeah, I had something that I was going to ask, and this happens every podcast.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Yeah,
I
you can follow a script to a T, or you could have a script, and it's always going to take a journey, isn't it?
Where does your script take you? There you go. You saved me.
That's a good question. I mean, I do. I mean, one of my fun things I did once was, all right, I had coffee with a friend after dropping the kids off at school, and we had coffee, hung out for an hour. I was like, I have nothing on for the rest of the day. Cool. And I ended up going, all right, I'm just going to make a book today. So I walked for a better part of 3 hours, 4 hours, might have been 5 or 6. Shot a few hundred images. I'm not really sure how many. Got home, uploaded them, edited them, and then I uploaded the book to like Blurb, which I was using at the time, and made a print-on-demand book, paid for it, and it was done. Process of maybe 12 hours. It's interesting, you know. I need to do that again.
Hours.
Yeah, it was in my mailbox 2 weeks after that, you know. And it wasn't like the most refined thing, but it's like sometimes we get a bit too worried about process. Sometimes you just got to make things and see where it goes. You know?
Yeah, you got to give it a crack.
Yeah, I haven't done that again since, and I actually dug it up out of something recently. I was like, I really need to do that again, because it just sort of sometimes when you're. I mean, I remember doing, as mentioning earlier about doing when you do like life drawing, doing a fine arts degree in university, you spend a lot of time doing 30-second sketches, 2-minute sketches. And, you know, photography is only 125th of a second most of the time, you know, somewhere in there. So it's incredible what you can produce in a short amount of time. And sometimes we get too precious about things. Sometimes that's important. I mean, I have a draft of a book which I've been looking at for 3 months right now.
I think you better get onto that.
It's close. But like sometimes you just got to like hammer stuff out, and that's a part of the process. You learn from that. You know, I guess using a musical analogy, it's like a live concert versus making an album. You can make an album of a live concert. Similar kind of concept with making a one-day photo book. You know.
So that photo book you made,
yeah,
is that how photo books now started? Is that?
Well, no. I spent a lot of time. I was on JobKeeper. And I was like, all right, so I've had the same job for 10 years. Definitely know I want to do something else. Haven't felt as connected to my creativity through my work as I'd really like to. So I just sat there one day, probably at home during lockdown, and was like, all right, so photography, what are all the different things that I like? Photography, books, design, right? And so I just, you know, it was sort of mind mapping the concept, I suppose. And, you know, so, you know, there was enough time. I sat there and, you know, within 10 minutes, you can set up an Instagram account, a Gmail account, Facebook page, and a free WordPress site, and just kind of go from there. And it's gradually evolved over, 3.5 years or so, from landscape photo books to photo books now. And it's just gradually turned into things. And now I've had, like the other week, I had 3 submissions for fully published books. At the very early stages of working on something with a photographer who's been published in the Wall Street Journal, and was a Fashion Week.
Impressive.
Yeah, and he was like one of the official photographers of Fashion Week in New York. We've been talking like just people. It's beginning to really get to a point, but that's been 3 years of daily work and planning and a bunch of wrong turns and 1 or 2 projects you go, that's not going to happen now.
It sounds like you just kind of started on a whim.
Almost, yeah.
No real plan.
We all
Is there a
had
plan now?
we all had spare time during COVID, and I was like, forget being bored. Let's make something out of it. You know. I have some. I actually found a folder on a hard drive or on Dropbox or something recently of all my like lockdown walk photos, and I just all that time at home, I was like, all right, I'm going to explore every possible street in that 5-kilometer radius, and I made photos of it. And I feel like that was a bit of a cliche. There's probably thousands of books and projects that came out of that. I won't do anything with it, but there's photos there. And they'll serve a purpose historically at some point,
Is there a plan now
For
photo books now?
yeah, I mean, I've got I'm trying to find a way to make it a business as well as a passion project. And I've actually had a couple of great coaching sessions with some people, interesting creative people. And I'm got myself I'm going on to what used to be the niche scheme. So I'm sort of in the process of writing a business plan to make that as much a business as anything else, because it'd be great to be able to make books for other people, but also telling stories of organizations, theater companies. There's so many aspects to it,
Yeah, I just want. I mean, I buy books.
Yeah,
my book you can probably see there.
Yeah.
A few, and I'm just wondering. Well, the question I was going to ask is: are people buying books?
Yeah, look, the last few months have been a bit quieter, but the first one I made, which was 18 months ago, I printed 50 copies, sold them all. The next one, the coastal one that I made, I printed 70 copies, sold most of those. I think there's 6 or 7, plus that one. And, the last, 3-4 months, let's say 6 months have been pretty quiet. Haven't sold much, if anything. It's definitely a hard slog, but the way I structure the money side of it, it works okay.
I'm guessing you're handling all the, the design.
Oh, literally everything.
Printing,
yeah.
Distribution.
I have them printed in Melbourne, but I design them, distribute them, market them, sell them, mail them, everything. Yeah.
Well, you need some help.
Yeah, look, I do have somebody that helps me out with, there's a newsletter I run for that fortnightly. But a lot of it's just a process that has been set up, and you copy and paste and you drop stuff in there. And the real key now is to use my kind of reinvigorated design process. And because these are quite easy to make, and then make these next there's couple of books that I'm in the process of working towards, which will be another step up price point wise.
So like a special edition sort of.
Well, just like harder copy, cloth bound.
Yeah.
Like any business, you go into from all my years of hospitality, you go into a place and there's going to be a cheap sandwich and an expensive sandwich. And like every business has to have their price points, and I'm sort of working on other price points for that kind of particular thing.
How does your process go for selecting artists? So you get a few.
I mean, like on the website, there's a list of currently open submissions. And I literally just take submissions. People, sometimes I get 10 or 15 in a week. Sometimes, I haven't had any really much for the last month. But I just literally put them in a folder, put them on my hard drive, and spend a lot of time looking at things, making comparisons, seeing how it works. Part of the brainstorming at the beginning of the whole process was just writing down very loose landscape concepts, and I'm still kind of in that realm, but I have one current theme which is interiors open right now, so that's a little bit of a push outside of that. It's just interesting to see where it goes.
So these books, they're not of one artist.
No. In this one, they're both of them up to this point have been 16 people. So there's one feature person who gets a bigger chunk. So it's 12 for the feature, and then tends to be 6 for the other people. And that keeps the book at a certain weight, size, and all the rest of it, which keeps the shipping pricing at a certain level. And is this flow and effect of money and all the rest of it to kind of make it a thing.
Yeah, and are you having to knock many people back?
Not tons. But I mean, having said that, I've got the first book that I produced for the Photobooks now was The Suburbs. I actually have it essentially a second book, a sequel to that book, which I will put together. It's something probably later this year, early next year. And each book will kind of work that way. I haven't planned out beyond that, but each one, now that I have the templates to make that work, everything moves much more quickly, and I can produce them more quickly and more often.
Say you got like a theme, like let's say interior, but it could be anything.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you got 20 artists or 20 photographers who have submitted.
Yeah.
But you can't accept them all. So how do you go about
choosing
which one?
I kind of start with a zero draft, as a writer would call it, and I'll put everything into it that I have at a certain point, and I will just go from there. And I tend to keep all of the images together from a certain person, so they are kind of like chapters of the book. And then if I feel like something doesn't fit, I just cut it. It's a kind of a harsh process, and I probably have.
You don't mind hurting people's feelings?
It's my project, you know. I've had one or two people who have probably got a bit annoyed with me, but
really, what have they said?
Oh, I thought it was going to be in the book. I'm like, well, sorry, you know, it is. Ultimately, it says Photobooks now. It's my creation, my curation. Nobody says there's no guarantee of being included. And I've been cut from plenty of things in my life. Just how it goes, you know? Like,
have you copped any abuse?
Nah.
Oh, that's good.
No. Yeah, look, there's a lot of work to do, and I got a lot to learn. The tyranny of distance in Australia is nuts. You know, I had a big a box of 6 of these going to one of the contributors, and I mailed them for $80 odd. And then 6 or 4 months later or something, it just came back.
Why?
Somewhere in that complicated Italian mailing addresses, I got something wrong, so I have had to send them again.
At your cost?
At my cost. He paid initially. I gave him a copy. He bought more, and I was like, you know what? If I got it wrong, I got to wear it. So be it. It's only happened once, so I've made about 100 books now. I've shipped over 100 books. I've had that one was returned. One copy was damaged. It was sent to the US. Everything else has arrived perfectly, which is nice.
Yeah, that is good.
I'm pretty careful about the packaging. But 2 out of whatever it is not too bad, you know.
Yeah, and you mentioned you want to make this run a bit more like a business.
Yeah.
So that means obviously you're going to want to like outsource.
Well, printing will always be outsourced, but I mean, I've had a chat to a couple of graphic designers who are kind of interested. It'd be great to have other curators come on board and be like, I want to curate this theme, I want to curate that theme, and just see where it goes. There's lots of opportunities there. And the photo book market is slightly insane at this point. I think, you know, it's become over the last however many years it's been, has become there's lots of micro publishers and small publishers and all sorts of stuff. It's great. It's probably good for the process. It's a fun way to build a community. We've got there's pushing 4,000 Instagram followers. There's around 2,000 people in the Facebook group. Like, there's always stuff coming and going, and it's just a fun way to have a group of people who kind of enjoy each other's work.
Do you have any concerns that, like, you know, you go down the more business route, focusing more on business, that you'll kind of lose a little bit of the spirit of what it is?
Yeah, look, there does need to be a bit of a you got to be careful with that, because it's as I've said to many people, it's not about making money. I've put a lot of my own money into it. I've been lucky to be able to give the books to the people who contribute, and that will only grow as it gets better. But again, I've had real estate companies that have come to me and gone, I want to make a book. I'm like, all right, I'm not quite prepared for that yet. So I'm in this process of making it move in that direction. And if the business stuff can finance the fine art stuff, great. That works well.
Yeah, I mean, what did the real estate agent want?
They wanted me to produce a book of. And look, it came at a really weird time. It was over Christmas time, and the communication was really broken. It didn't end up happening, but it kind of moved me in a direction of thought. I was like, all right, that could be a really interesting way to look at things. And like, you know, I've had a lot of. Well, I've had a non-creative job for many years, and I really like the idea of finding a way to make my creative work my bread and butter, and it's getting there, you know.
Yeah, slowly but surely.
Exactly,
like anything worth doing.
Yeah.
I want to dive into something that you've mentioned a couple of times, which is music.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, I guess you take some inspiration from music directly.
Not so much with photos. I did a lot with painting. I literally always have. If I'm by myself, well, actually, not. If I'm doing something that's not a conversation, I'll probably have music on, or a podcast for that matter. But like, I loved music as a child. I loved creating music as a child. I had a teacher who kind of killed it for me at one point. And also my voice changed as they do as when you're a man. And I didn't kind of learn to sing again. And I focused more on the visual side of things, but a lot of my closest friends have always been musicians. And so like, it's a real inspiration. Music has got me through some of the craziest parts of my life. Some of the most incredible experiences of my life have been, concerts. Sometimes behind the lens, I've done a bit of that, not as much as I'd like, but it's just it's almost my religion in a sense.
Yeah, what are you listening to?
All sorts of stuff. Like today, it's been a bit of Nick Cave, but also I love lots of electronic music. So crazy stuff from Warp, like Ortec and Aphex Twin, and also growing up in the Midwest, there's like Chicago house and Detroit techno, and then. But also, like, I spent time in the South, so I like blues and jazz. I've seen Marilyn Manson play. I've seen Bryn Terfel sing. I've been to lots and lots and lots of different kinds of music, and I'm really into lots of different kinds of... As long as it's an actual creative endeavor, as opposed to a packaged pop situation, I'm kind of into it, you know?
I guess, does the style of music you're listening to influence the types of photos you're taking or the way they look?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I've noticed like on Instagram for some period you've been able to like pair a song with your post, and I keep going, all the music they seem to put on is not really my thing. But it's very much, if I'm out shooting by myself, I will have my headphones in and something will be playing, be it classical or death metal, whatever.
Metal's good.
Metal's great, yeah. It's just like music and cinema are really interesting. I mean, somebody said cinema is the great synthesis of all the different art forms. And I definitely agree with that.
It sounds like probably a biased opinion.
It is.
Yeah.
I feel like that was Scorsese, so go figure. But yeah, like just that, but like visually and orally, the combination of things is important, you know. And if that's the only thing that's missing from photography for me. And I have playlists that I've put together for exhibitions that I've had. I'm actually kind of in the process of trying to make a graphic design reel, like a show reel. And I literally started brainstorming it today and like trying to find the right music that I can license to put that together to bring a two-dimensional still image to life, to grab people a bit more. It's an interesting challenge, you know?
Yeah, there is a lot of music out there to
crazy.
choose from. It's infinite.
I mean, I finished high school and had 600 or 700 CDs that I owned. And then I got to my mid-20s and I had that plus about 800 pieces of vinyl. And then eventually they all ended up in storage. And I was like, what do I do with that now? I sold all the records.
No.
Yeah, just like I got tired of...
left? Because I'll take some.
I got tired... No, I literally sold them all. I just got tired of carting stuff around. I had a lot of books. And I was like, why do I need my records when I can... And I do miss them. Maybe in the future I'll buy some more again. But yeah, the way that we consume media has changed so dramatically since I was a teenager. It's unrecognizable, you know? My kids barely know what CDs are, you know?
I think they're coming back.
I've read, yeah. I don't know why. It's all that plastic. It's obscene.
Well, it's better than it ending up in landfill, I think.
That's certainly for sure. Yeah,
they can still play music.
I've heard tapes are coming back too, which is ridiculous.
That's another one. Yeah, that's
CDs
wild.
I get the CD quality and they're fairly hardy, but tapes are ridiculous. Again, I had hundreds of tapes at one point, and they all would have ended up in landfill at some point, you know.
Yeah, but there's a joy to trying to tape music off
I
the
did
radio.
tons of that. Yeah. Like underground college radio in the States. I had a friend who would his parents had a surround sound system, so we would connect the surround sound system to the television and then record like Pearl Jam unplugged on MTV, which you couldn't get that recording for years afterwards. And there's anything that we would see, we would just record. It was great. It works differently now because everything's streamed and everything's archived somewhere. You can find it if you really want to, you know?
I feel like we're going to end up going down quite a rabbit hole with music.
That's part of the fun, you know? Yeah, absolutely.
But I want to tie it off by last question.
Sure.
Wrapping around again to your beginnings.
Yeah.
You said you went to is it a Montessori
kindergarten? Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's not the norm. It's not.
No,
you know,
it's not. Yeah.
How did that, I guess, influence your upbringing?
Well, I feel like it was very much a creative process. It was very much about learning through play, I suppose. This might not be right. I haven't really thought about it in all those years. But my overwhelming memories of that were just the ability to be able to play and create. I remember drawing and doing lots of block stuff. And look, I feel like my kids have both been I have a 6-year-old and a 15-year-old. My son has only relatively recently finished kinder. And they certainly weren't doing things quite like that that I was doing. I feel like it was a pretty creative start to life.
So was it just the kindergarten you went to?
Yeah, my parents chose that. It was local-ish. And yeah, I think they knew from a very young age that I was pretty creative. And so they put me in that and loved it. And that definitely sent me on a direction.
Yeah, so you think if you went to I guess, for lack of a better word, a regular kindergarten, maybe it wouldn't have made a difference. But, I mean, do you think...
I think a lot of that stuff is very much... Well, yeah, there's always that question, is it nature or is it nurture? And I think I did come... I mean, my mum's not creative, but my dad certainly was. And they both encouraged that because they saw it in me. I think it probably would have happened anyway, but I think I just maybe discovered it earlier than I might have done otherwise. It's hard to say, but does that answer the question?
Yeah, I like diving into
education and things that's like that. That's part of what it is. I mean, I remember I had a really bad algebra teacher at one point and hated it, but then I had a great teacher and really actually loved it, and I still love mathematics. It's fascinating.
You mentioned another teacher you hated earlier as well.
Yeah, the music teacher.
Yeah,
killed it
What
completely.
did they do?
She was just not a happy place to be in, and it was a pretty strict private school in New Zealand, and it just didn't do it for me. So I kind of just ended up giving up music at that point.
Was she trying to kill it for you?
Who knows?
maybe saw a talent and thought, you know what, if I can't have it, you can't. You don't think any of that was going on?
I guess that's a possibility. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, I did. I mean, I learned to play guitar at one point. And I still know a few chords. I haven't picked one up for years. I think that I feel like I probably would have enjoyed anything creative, and that was just like something I learned along the way. And then I was like, I directed all my energy into something else, you know.
It's one of those things. I feel like creativity is one of those things that's, well, it's not difficult to nurture, but it's really easy to kill.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
In someone, like,
Yeah.
and it can just be one moment.
Oh, absolutely. That's like
that-
my singing example is one of those, is a prime example of that. Absolutely. Yeah. But I still love music. It's like it gets me through that. Got me through the hardest points in my life, and it's there's always a memory attached to. I hear the Doors, and it takes me back to being 18 and in the States. I'm like, I can't even listen to it. I can message my girlfriend who were dating at the time, and we still email on a pretty regular basis. I'm like, I just can't listen to it anymore because there's so much that time. She's like, yeah, it's kind of the same. I'm like, that is what it is, you know. I can't listen to Pearl Jam anymore, not because I dislike him. It just was very much of that time, you know. Nirvana, kind of the same thing. When you're a 90s kid, that you grew up listening to that stuff.
Yeah, I haven't listened to Nirvana in a while. I might have to jump on Spotify.
I pull it up occasionally. I'm like, yeah, it was pretty incredible music when that stuff came out. It was really, you can see why the world changed. They were one of dozens of bands that made the world change, but they were the biggest, kind of the peak of that, you know. And when you look at like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue and Whitesnake leading up to that, and Nirvana's like not even in the same world. And also Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and that whole, just a different vibe that came in the late 80s and 90s. And it had been there for a long time before that with punk and other things, but that was when it, I suppose, white suburban kids got a little bit edgier, possibly. I don't know.
Well, on that note, I think I'm going to have to start a music podcast and ask you along.
I'd be into that. Yeah, it'd be fascinating
to be on it with me, to host it with me, maybe, because you know a lot more than I do.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, well, thank you, Andrew, for coming along.
No, my pleasure.
And sharing your story. And yeah, thanks.
Beautiful. Cool. Cut.
Done.